He don't get that power today.
Murder of 13-year-old Esme Kenny.
Death row is supposed to be the end of the line. It is where the justice system puts people it has decided are too dangerous to ever walk free again. But even behind bars, some of these individuals continue to terrify everyone around them. Mark Goudeau.
1,200 years behind bars. That's the sentence the convicted baseline killer is carrying on his shoulders tonight after a face-off in court with the judge.
Yesterday, a jury found the 47-year-old former construction worker guilty of being the baseline killer. He is convicted of murdering 9 people between the summers of 2005 and 2006.
Back in 2005, something terrifying was happening across Phoenix, Arizona. Women were being grabbed off the streets at gunpoint, sexually assaulted, and in many cases, shot execution style in the head. And for over a year, nobody could figure out who was doing it. The crimes started along Baseline Road in South Phoenix, so the media gave the unknown attacker a name, the Baseline Killer. Early on, police had been calling him the Baseline Rapist, after reports surfaced of a light-skinned black male assaulting women and girls at gunpoint near the road. Some of the victims were as young as 12 years old, but when investigators connected those assaults to a growing string of armed robberies and murders spreading across the entire metro area, the name shifted to the Baseline Killer. Between August 2005 and June 2006, 9 people were killed across Phoenix, 8 women and 1 man. The victims came from all different walks of life. One was a food truck owner named Romelia Vargas, who was found shot to death inside her truck alongside her cook, leaving behind 4-month-old twins. Other victims were snatched from public corners and sidewalks, taken to secluded spots, and shot in the head with a .380 caliber handgun. The attacker used disguises constantly, switching hats and hairstyles between attacks. He sometimes approached victims pretending to be homeless or asking for a ride, just to catch them off guard. Beyond the 9 murders, there were 15 sexual assaults on women and young girls, 11 kidnappings, and a slew of armed robberies. In total, 86 felonies across 13 separate incidents, with 33 victims overall. And what made it even worse for the people of Phoenix is that at the exact same time, 2 other serial attackers known as the serial shooters were also active in the city, with drive-by shootings that killed at least 8 more people. So the entire city was under siege from multiple predators at once, which is something that almost never happens. Phoenix police spent thousands of hours chasing leads throughout the summer of 2006. They held community meetings, distributed a composite sketch of the suspect based on survivor descriptions, and put up billboards across the metro area offering a $100,000 reward. But the Baseline Killer kept slipping through every net they set up. The real break in the case came from parole officers in the Northeast Parole Office, who flagged a man named Mark Goudeau because he closely matched the sketch. Goudeau already had a violent criminal record. He had served 13 years of a 21-year sentence for aggravated assault after beating a woman's head with a barbell. The original charges in that case had also included rape and kidnapping, but those were eventually pled down. On the 6th of September 2006, which happened to be his 42nd birthday, Goudeau was arrested at his home in central Phoenix. DNA evidence from a state crime lab linked him to the sexual assault of 2 sisters that had occurred the previous September. One of those sisters had been 6 months pregnant at the time. He was convicted on those charges first, in a 2007 trial, and sentenced to 438 years in prison. But the murder charges were still building. When police had searched his home months earlier, they found jewelry and personal items belonging to several of the Baseline Killer's victims. 7 survivors picked him out of lineups, and an 8th identified his voice alone. Ballistic experts confirmed the same. .380 caliber handgun had been used in all 9 murders, though the weapon itself was never recovered. His murder trial lasted 7.5 weeks. On the 31st of October 2011, after 7 days of deliberation, a Maricopa County jury found Goudeau guilty on 67 felony counts, including all 9 first-degree murder charges. 1 month later, on November 30, he was sentenced to death 9 times, once for each murder victim, on top of the existing 438-year sentence from the earlier trial. Goudeau maintains his innocence to this day. In February 2026, his attorneys filed a 384-page appeal, alleging that Phoenix police planted evidence and mishandled DNA testing. He remains on death row at ASPC Florence in Arizona, while that appeal works its way through the courts. Nico Jenkins.
Years. He don't get that power today, so no, I don't have anything to say to him.
45 to 50 years to run consecutive to all murder convictions at counts 1, 4, 7.
This is Nico Jenkins when he was first booked for murder in September 2013. These exclusive photos show what he looks like now.
On the 30th of July 2013, a man named Nico Jenkins walked out of a Nebraska prison after serving 10.5 years for 2 armed carjackings he committed when he was just 15 years old. He had spent nearly his entire adolescence and young adulthood behind bars, and within 11 days of his release, 4 people in Omaha were dead. Jenkins came from a family with a long and well-documented history of violence. His father had multiple criminal convictions, including terroristic threats, before he passed away in 2009. As a child, Jenkins brought a gun to his elementary school at the age of 7. By 13, he had assaulted someone with a knife. At 15, he committed the 2 armed carjackings that sent him to prison for over a decade. While incarcerated, Jenkins assaulted corrections officers multiple times and participated in a prison riot. He repeatedly told prison staff he was hearing voices and asked for mental health treatment, which he later claimed he never adequately received. So, when the state of Nebraska released him in the summer of 2013, what happened next probably should not have surprised anyone as much as it did. The first victims were Juan Uribe Peña and Jorge Cajiga Ruiz. On the 11th of August 2013, they were lured to a spot near a public swimming pool in South Omaha by 2 women who had promised a sexual encounter. Those 2 women were Jenkins' cousin, Christine Bordeaux, and his sister, Erica Jenkins. When the men arrived, they were each shot once in the head with a shotgun loaded with Brennecke Classic Magnum 12-gauge deer slugs, and their pockets were turned inside out. 8 days later, on August 19, a man named Curtis Bradford was found dead behind a detached garage. Bradford had actually been in prison with Jenkins, and the 2 had posed together for a Facebook photo within 24 hours of the killing. Authorities believe Jenkins and his sister lured Bradford out by telling him they wanted to do a robbery together, then shot him in the back of the head. 2 days after that, on August 21, Jenkins and 3 accomplices originally set out to rob concertgoers, leaving a Lil Wayne show in downtown Omaha. When that plan fell apart, they drove to the northwest part of the city in the early morning hours. They pulled in front of a white SUV driven by Andrea Kruger, a 33-year-old married mother of 3 who was on her way home from a late bartending shift. She had just gone through a McDonald's drive-thru. Jenkins yanked her out of the driver's seat and shot her in the head. Police eventually tracked Jenkins down, partly through surveillance footage from a local gun outlet that showed one of his associates buying the distinctive ammunition used in all 4 killings. On the 3rd of September 2013, Jenkins sat down with investigators for a rambling 8-hour confession. His explanation for the murders was something nobody expected. He said the killings were sacrifices to Apophis, an ancient Egyptian serpent god associated with chaos and destruction, and that Apophis had been speaking to him since childhood. While in custody, Jenkins carved the number 666 into his forehead, but he was looking in a mirror, so the numbers came out backwards. He sliced the word Satan into his face and split his own tongue into a forked, snake-like shape. He mutilated other parts of his body in extreme ways as well, all claiming it was in devotion to the serpent god. The courtroom proceedings were called the Nico Show by legal observers. Jenkins represented himself, howled, spoke in what he claimed were tongues, and laughed as prosecutors described the details of each victim's death. In May 2017, a 3-judge panel sentenced Jenkins to death for all 4 murders, calling the spree one of the worst in the history of Nebraska. 6 of his family members were also convicted in connection with the killings, including Erica Jenkins, who received a life sentence. The Nebraska Supreme Court upheld his conviction and death sentence on direct appeal in 2019, and the U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear his case in April 2020. Luis Bracamontes.
Jury in the above entitled action determined that the penalty to be imposed upon Luis Enriquez Monroy Bracamontes for the murder of Sacramento County Sheriff's Deputy Daniel Oliver is death. That on or about October 24th, 2014, Luis Enriquez Monroy Bracamontes did unlawfully take a motor vehicle in the possession of Chantel Robinson, possession of John Maxwell, by means of force and fear. We find the defendant guilty. We further find the allegation that the defendant personally used a firearm, to wit, an unknown caliber handgun, to be true. Dated February 9, 2018, signed four-person.
On the morning of the 24th of October 2014, Sacramento County Sheriff's Deputy Danny Oliver and his partner were investigating a suspicious vehicle parked at a Motel 6 on Arden Way in Sacramento, California. As the deputies walked up to the car, the man sitting behind the wheel pulled out a pistol and shot Oliver in the forehead without any warning at all. That man was Luis Bracamontes. Immediately after the shooting, Bracamontes and his wife, a 37-year-old woman named Janelle Monroy, fled the scene in the vehicle. What followed was a violent, chaotic run through the entire Sacramento metro area that lasted hours and crossed county lines. First, they carjacked a white Mustang from a woman at a nearby parking lot. Then they attempted to take another vehicle and shot the driver, a man named Anthony Holmes, during the attempt. Holmes survived, but Bracamontes and Monroy kept going. They headed northeast, driving roughly 30 miles from Sacramento toward the town of Auburn in Placer County. By the time law enforcement tracked them to the Auburn area, Bracamontes had armed himself with an AR-15 style rifle, in addition to the pistol he had already used. Placer County Sheriff's Detective Michael Davis Jr. responded to the scene along with his partner, Deputy Jeff Davis, who happened to share the same last name but was no relation. Bracamontes opened fire on them, fatally shooting Detective Davis and seriously wounding his partner. After an extensive manhunt through the rural hills and roads around Auburn, officers finally cornered and captured Bracamontes. So in the span of one single morning, he had killed 2 law enforcement officers from 2 separate counties, wounded a 3rd officer, and shot a civilian during a carjacking attempt. This was far from his first run-in with the American justice system. Bracamontes was a Mexican citizen who had been living in the United States illegally and had already been deported at least twice before. His first deportation came in 1997 after a drug conviction in Arizona. He was arrested again in 1998 in Phoenix on drug charges but was released for reasons that have never been fully explained. He was deported a second time, in 2001. At some point after that second deportation, he managed to re-enter the country yet again, this time living under the alias Marcelo Marquez. So here was a man who had been removed from the country twice, who had prior drug convictions, and who still managed to come back and carry out one of the most devastating single-day attacks on law enforcement that California had seen in years. His trial began in January 2018 in Sacramento County Superior Court, and from the very first day, Bracamontes made it absolutely clear he had no interest in any kind of defense strategy. He openly admitted to the shootings right there in the courtroom, told everyone present he wished he had killed more, and said he would break out and do it again if he ever got the chance. Throughout the months-long trial, he laughed at prosecutors, smiled at the victims' families, blew kisses to the gallery, and even pretended to shoot people in the courtroom with his finger. The jurors had to sit through all of it. On the 9th of February 2018, the jury found him guilty on all counts, including 2 counts of first-degree murder, attempted murder, carjacking, and various weapons violations. The verdict came after a trial that lasted roughly 3 months. A jury recommended the death penalty, after only 4 hours of deliberation. When that recommendation was read, Bracamontes looked directly at Deputy Oliver's mother, grinned, and clapped his hands. On the 25th of April 2018, Judge Steve White formally sentenced Bracamontes to death. He had to be removed from the courtroom during the victim impact statements after he started shouting. His accomplice, Janelle Monroy, was sentenced to 50 years to life in prison after the court rejected her claim that she had been acting under duress. Bracamontes remains on death row in California, and his case continues to work through the lengthy state appeals process. Mikel Brady.
Prosecution is trying to pin the crime solely on Brady.
He was involved, but he's not.
Most people on death row got there for crimes they committed on the outside, but Mikel Brady was already serving a lengthy sentence inside a North Carolina prison when he masterminded and carried out the deadliest escape attempt in the state's entire history. Brady grew up in Randolph, Vermont, born on the 11th of March 1989 to a teenage mother. His childhood was brutal. His father was physically, mentally, and sexually abusive, according to testimony from his mother during his trial. From an early age, Brady was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and PTSD, but his father refused to let him take the medication that was prescribed. By his teenage years, Brady was already deep into criminal behavior, racking up more than 20 separate charges in Vermont over several years. At one point, he was released from a Vermont prison on furlough, and for a brief stretch, things seemed to stabilize. He got a job at a local butcher shop and joined a softball league. He started taking his medications regularly, and his girlfriend became pregnant with his son. But that stability collapsed quickly. In 2013, Brady was caught trying to poach deer and fled Vermont while still on furlough, violating the terms of his release. He ended up in North Carolina, where that same year he was pulled over for a simple seatbelt violation. His response was to pull out a gun and shoot State Trooper Michael Potts 4 times at close range. The trooper survived, but the attack earned Brady a 24-year state sentence and a separate 40-year federal sentence. He was housed at Pasquotank Correctional Institution in Elizabeth City to serve his state time first, and that is where he started planning. Over the course of several months, Brady recruited 3 other inmates, Weiser Buckman, Jonathan Monk, and Seth Frazier. Working from his position at the prison's sewing plant, Brady quietly gathered tools and supplies over an extended period without anyone catching on. He assembled crude but deadly weapons from hammers, scissors, pipes, and a 2x4 studded with nails. He also packed survival backpacks for all 4 men using materials he had collected piece by piece from the sewing operation, including clothing and provisions they would need once they got outside the walls. On the 12th of October 2017, they made their move. Brady started by setting a fire inside the sewing plant stockroom to create chaos and pull guards away from the escape route. Then the 4 inmates attacked prison staff with the weapons Brady had stockpiled. 4 employees were killed in the assault: correctional officers Justin Smith and Wendy Shannon, maintenance worker Jeffrey Howe, and sewing plant manager Veronica Darden. Multiple other staff members were badly wounded as well. After the attacks, Brady made it over the perimeter fence, but he was caught just outside the facility and surrendered. Car keys were found along the fence line, and investigators recovered the survival backpacks the group had stashed for their run. Brady's trial began in October 2019 in Dare County, and he took the stand himself. He testified in detail about how the escape was organized, how the weapons were assembled, and how each victim was attacked. He called himself the pack leader and showed no visible emotion while recounting the violence. The jury deliberated for just 35 minutes before finding him guilty of all 4 counts of first-degree murder, plus 10 additional charges including attempted escape, assault with a deadly weapon, and arson. During the sentencing phase, the defense argued for life in prison based on his untreated mental illness and abusive upbringing. The prosecution told jurors that if they chose life over death, it would be open season on corrections officers across the state. The jury came back with a unanimous recommendation of death in less than an hour. On the 28th of October, 2019, Judge Jerry Tillett formally sentenced Brady to death, making him the 143rd inmate on North Carolina's death row. He was initially transferred to a federal penitentiary in Kentucky due to safety concerns and later moved to ADX Florence, the federal supermax prison in Colorado, where he remains today. Jason Thornburg. On the 22nd of September, 2021, Fort Worth firefighters responded to a dumpster fire outside a storage facility on Bonnie Drive. It seemed routine at first, but after putting out the flames, they found something that would haunt every single person on that call. Inside the dumpster were the heavily dismembered remains of at least 3 people. 5 days later, investigators tracked down a 41-year-old electrician named Jason Thornburg who had been living at a motel nearby. He agreed to come in for questioning voluntarily. And what he told detectives over the course of that interview was beyond anything they were prepared to hear. Thornburg explained that he had been renting room 113 at the Mid-City Inn in Euless, Texas, since July 2021. Outside the motel, neighbors described him as a quiet, religious man. He was often seen reading his Bible, talking about God, and telling people he wanted to help those around him. Inside that room, over the span of approximately 7 days in mid-September, Thornburg killed 3 people one by one. His first victim was David Lueras, a 42-year-old man who had been sharing the motel room with him. Thornburg told detectives he believed Lueras needed to be sacrificed, so he slit his throat. He then dismembered the body in the bathtub using a Milwaukee straight blade knife, and he consumed part of Lueras's heart. He stored the remains in trash bags under the bed for days before buying plastic storage bins from a nearby store. About 2 days later, a 33-year-old woman named Maricruz Mathis came to the motel. Begay had left on a trip with Thornburg and was never seen or heard from again. Her body has never been found, and the FBI still considers her case open. Her family has spent years looking for answers. So across a span of roughly 4 years, Thornburg killed at least 5 people that authorities know of, all of them framed in his mind as divinely mandated sacrifices. His trial began in November 2024 in Tarrant County. The defense argued he suffered from fetal alcohol syndrome and brain damage from a 2002 assault, and that he truly believed what he was doing was sacred. The prosecution called him a psychopath and a calculated serial killer who weaponized the Bible to justify what he wanted to do. On the 4th of December 2024, the jury unanimously sentenced Jason Thornburg to death. He is now on death row at the Allen B. Polunsky unit in Texas. Krista Pike.
The Tennessee Supreme Court has set an execution date for Krista Pike.
In 1995, the Knoxville Job Corps Center in Tennessee was a federally funded program designed to help at-risk teenagers get their lives on track through education and vocational training. Among the students enrolled, there were 18-year-old Krista Pike, her 17-year-old boyfriend Tadarrell Shipp, their friend Shadola Peterson, who was also 18, and a 19-year-old classmate named Colleen Slemmer. Pike became fixated on the belief that Slemmer was trying to steal Shipp away from her, and that jealousy turned into something far beyond what anyone could have expected from a group of teenagers. On the night of the 12th of January, 1995, Pike, Shipp, and Peterson signed Slemmer out of their dormitory and walked her toward an isolated, abandoned steam plant near the University of Tennessee campus. They told her they wanted to make peace and offered to share some marijuana. Once they reached the secluded area, Pike and Shipp attacked. For approximately 30 minutes, Slemmer was beaten, slashed with a box cutter, and tortured while Peterson stood by as a lookout. A pentagram was carved into her chest. And finally, Pike smashed Slemmer's skull with a large chunk of asphalt, ending her life. When it was over, Pike pried a small piece of Slemmer's skull loose and kept it. A university groundskeeper found the body the following morning. He later testified in court that it was beaten so badly he initially mistook it for the remains of an animal. Pike had a deeply troubled history long before the killing. She was born premature in 1976 in Beckley, West Virginia, to parents who were frequently negligent and whose relationship was volatile. They married, divorced, remarried, and divorced again. An aunt later described finding the infant Pike crawling through piles of animal waste in the house. As she grew up, Pike endured sexual abuse throughout her childhood. She was violently assaulted by a stranger on the side of the road when she was 17, and she first attempted to take her own life at the age of 12. At some point, her family fractured completely, and Pike was bounced between relatives before ending up at the Job Corps Center in Knoxville. That is where she met Shipp, Peterson, and Slemmer. But almost none of this backstory made it into her original trial. Her defense attorneys put forward a bare-bones case during the sentencing phase, lasting only a few hours. The jury never heard about her mental health conditions, her brain damage, or the full scope of the abuse she had experienced throughout her childhood and adolescence. On the 22nd of March 1996, after just a few hours of deliberation, a jury found Pike guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. 8 days later, on March 30, she was sentenced to death. She was 20 years old, making her the youngest woman sentenced to death in the modern era of the American justice system. Her boyfriend, Shipp, who participated in the attack and later admitted he was the one who carved the pentagram into Slemmer's chest, received a life sentence because he was 17 and not eligible for the death penalty under Tennessee law. He has since been up for parole and was denied in late 2025. Peterson, who served as the lookout and testified against Pike at trial, received probation and walked free. So, of the 3 people involved in Slemmer's death, only Pike received a death sentence. While on death row, Pike spent nearly 30 years in what her attorneys have described as solitary confinement, housed in a cell the size of a parking space next to the severely mentally ill unit of the women's prison. She was also convicted in 2004 of the attempted murder of another inmate. In September 2025, the Tennessee Supreme Court set Pike's execution date for the 30th of September 2026. If it goes forward, she will become the first woman executed in Tennessee in over 200 years. and the only person put to death in the state for a crime committed at age 18, 19, or 20 in the modern death penalty era. Dexter Johnson.
Next, we go back into the archives for a sentencing from...
On the night of the 18th of June 2006, 23-year-old Maria Aparice and her 17-year-old boyfriend, Hui No, were sitting together inside her Toyota Matrix, parked right outside No's house in Houston, Texas. It was around midnight, and they were just spending time together, talking in the car. That is when a group of 5 people approached, armed with a shotgun. Among them was Dexter Johnson, who had turned 18 just days before, along with his close friend Courtroom Fields, who was also 18, and a 23-year-old named Alvy Butler. They forced the young couple into the back seat at gunpoint, climbed into the car, and started driving. For a while, they just drove Aparice and No around different areas of Houston, robbing them of their money, their credit cards, their phones, and anything else of value they had on them. At various points during the drive, they stopped the car and forced the victims to hand over information about their bank accounts and personal belongings. But instead of letting them go after taking everything, Johnson directed the group toward a secluded, dead-end road, far from any houses or witnesses. There, Johnson sexually assaulted Aparice while No was held at gunpoint nearby and forced to listen to everything that was happening to her. Afterward, Johnson and another member of the group walked both victims into the woods at the end of the road and shot them in the head, killing them both. Aparice was 23 years old, No was 17, and this was not even an isolated crime. Harris County prosecutors later described it as part of a 25-day crime spree involving Johnson and his associates that also included 3 additional killings during the same period. So 4 separate murders were connected to this group of young men, all committed over the course of less than 1 month, and Johnson was identified as the one calling the shots and running the operation. His trial took place in 2007 in Harris County. Throughout the proceedings, his defense attorneys tried a specific strategy. They argued that it was actually Fields and another accomplice who had pulled the trigger in the woods, not Johnson. Johnson himself never denied taking part in the carjacking, the robbery, or the sexual assault. But his legal team worked hard to shift the blame for the actual shootings onto the others in the group. The prosecution pushed back aggressively. They presented evidence and testimony showing that Johnson was the leader of the group and that he personally marched both victims into the woods before they were killed. The jury found him guilty of capital murder and sentenced him to death. And when that sentence was read aloud in the courtroom, Johnson lost control. He grabbed a chair and hurled it across the room. Multiple bailiffs rushed in and had to physically restrain him and drag him out while his family members in the gallery screamed and directed threats at the families of Aparice and No. In the years since, Johnson's case has become a drawn-out legal battle centered on whether he is intellectually disabled and therefore ineligible for execution under U.S. Supreme Court precedent. His attorneys have argued that Johnson has an IQ of roughly 70, which would meet the threshold for intellectual disability, and that he has permanent brain damage. They have also emphasized that he was barely past his 18th birthday when the crime took place, making him only just old enough to be eligible for the death penalty at all. Federal courts have stepped in twice to block his execution, once ahead of a May 2019 date and again before an August 2019 date, each time sending the case back to a lower court for further examination of the intellectual disability claims. 2 of Johnson's accomplices, Ashley Irvin and Courtroom Fields, are serving life sentences without the possibility of parole. Johnson himself has been on Texas death row since 2007, and after nearly 2 decades of legal proceedings, no new execution date has been set as the appeals continue working through the federal court system. Anthony Kirkland.
Saturday's murder of 13-year-old Esme Kenny landed Anthony Kirkland in jail.
Some people get a second chance at life and do something meaningful with it. Anthony Kirkland got that second chance and used it to end 4 more lives. In 1987, when he was just 18 years old and living in Cincinnati, Ohio, Kirkland raped and killed his girlfriend, Leola Douglas, after she refused to have sex with him. He then doused her body in lighter fluid and set her on fire to destroy the evidence. He was charged and eventually pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter. The court sentenced him to 10 to 25 years in prison. He served 16 of those years, before he was released on parole in 2004. For a couple of years after getting out, nothing happened. But by 2006, Kirkland started killing again, and this time, he did not stop. His second victim was 14-year-old Cassandra Crawford. In May 2006, Casonia snuck out of her grandmother's house in the Avondale neighborhood of Cincinnati and ran into Kirkland on the street. He started talking to her and eventually offered her money. When she refused, Kirkland flew into a rage. He attacked and strangled her, then set her body on fire near the dead end of Blair Avenue. Her case went completely cold for 3 years. Nobody could figure out who had done it. About a month after Crawford, in June 2006, Kirkland killed 45-year-old Mary Jo Newton. Then, in December of that same year, he took the life of 25-year-old Kimya Rollison. The pattern was identical every time: strangulation, then fire. During his later police confession, he explained it simply. He told detectives that fire purifies. But the reason Kirkland was finally caught had everything to do with his last victim. On the afternoon of Saturday, the 7th of March 2009, 13-year-old Esme Kenny left her family's home in the Winton Hills neighborhood of Cincinnati to go for a jog around the local reservoir. It was the first time she had gone out running by herself. Her mother, Lisa, was supposed to join her but was busy with housework. When Esme did not come back after 20 minutes, Lisa went looking and could not find her anywhere. By that evening, police had a missing persons report. By 1 in the morning, an Amber Alert was issued. Kirkland had been kicked out of an over-the-Rhine halfway house just 8 days before the attack. He was near the reservoir that Saturday afternoon. According to his later confession, Esme accidentally bumped into him while she was running and apologized. But something about her triggered a violent reaction. Kirkland later told detectives she reminded him of his son's mother, a woman he resented for keeping him from his child. He attacked the 13-year-old, chasing her into the woods when she tried to run. He punched and stomped her, then strangled her. He sexually assaulted her and set the lower half of her body on fire using her own clothing. A few hours later, police found Kirkland asleep in the woods, roughly 100 yards from where they discovered Esme's body. He had her watch and her iPod, which was engraved with her name. He denied seeing the girl at first, claiming he found the items on the ground. But over the course of an 8-hour interrogation, detectives broke through by appealing to his own feelings as a father. They kept asking him how he would feel if it were his son who was missing. Eventually, Kirkland agreed to lead them to the body and confess to all 4 of the killings from 2006 through 2009. At trial in March 2010, Kirkland pleaded guilty to the murders of Newton and Rollison and received life sentences without parole. The jury convicted him on all remaining counts related to Crawford and Kenny, including aggravated murder, attempted rape, and gross abuse of a corpse. He was sentenced to death for the murders of the 2 girls. In 2016, the Ohio Supreme Court ordered a resentencing after finding that the prosecutor had made prejudicial remarks during closing arguments. A new jury heard the case in 2018 and once again recommended death. The judge imposed the sentence, and the Ohio Supreme Court upheld it in 2020. Kirkland remains on Ohio's death row.